Okay, so I think we might as well make a start. Welcome everybody. My name's Charlotte, I'm the Patient Advocacy Manager here at Leukaemia Care, and I'm pleased to be chairing this discussion today. So the aim of the webinar today is very much a discussion. We've got multiple perspectives in the room from a professional and from a personal experience side, and I'm really excited to hear everyone's perspective on the topic of loneliness and leukemia. Before we start, just to say, if you'd like to ask questions, we are using the chat function. Please post either questions or comments there if you're on Zoom, and we will be able to pick those up as we go through the discussion. If you're watching on Facebook, we can also take comments there, and they will be relayed to me so we can add those to the discussion as well. Before we start, I will do a quick round of introductions of our panelists today. Lisa, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone, my name's Lisa Lee and I'm a hairy cell leukemia patient.
Thanks, Lisa. Jamie?
Hi, I'm Jamie Woods. I was diagnosed with acute promyelocytic leukemia and am now in remission.
Thanks, Jamie. You're a little bit quiet. I don't know if there's anything you can do to
I can try and fix that.
Thank you. Robin?
Hi, I'm Robin. I'm a CLL patient, chronic lymphocytic leukemia.
Thanks, Robin. And Melanie?
Hi, I'm Melanie. I'm a CML patient that's chronic myeloid leukemia.
Thank you. So we've got a good range of experience with lots of different leukemia types in the room, which is really, really good. And then, of course, we've got Anne. Anne, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm a counsellor. I work at the Christie and the Psycho-Oncology team.
Thanks, Anne. So what we're going to do today is start with a conversation between me and Anne about why we're here to talk about this topic, a little bit of context setting, and then we've got a number of discussion points for the entire panel. Please feel free to post questions at any point, and we will sort of weave those into the discussion at a time that we feel is appropriate. Anne, in terms of setting the context for today, I think the most appropriate question for me is what we mean by loneliness in the context of cancer and illness. I wondered if you could just expand on that as sort of a way to set the scene.
Thanks, Charlotte. Yes, I've been, supporting people affected by cancer for a good long time now, and this is the first time that this particular topic was kind of being given a banner title to think about, loneliness and leukemia, and I was just having a conversation with my colleague just before we started, and she said, "Gosh, what a rich topic that is," because just about everybody affected by cancer, and I know, we're thinking particularly around hematological malignancies today, but I'll use cancer as a shorthand, is going to be affected in some shape or form by an experience of loneliness. And there's quite a lot of thinking more generally about loneliness at the moment. So I went and had a look at some of the, there's a campaign to end loneliness. I had a look at some of the thinking and a couple of definitions. So, because I was thinking about isolation, and people talk about social isolation. So the lack of social contacts. So kind of missing human interaction, if you like. Whereas loneliness is that experience. It's defined as the distressing feeling of being alone or separated. So we're thinking about the feeling, we're thinking about the emotions that come with loneliness. When I was thinking about loneliness and leukemia, there's something about connectedness. There's something about how does one connect with others who don't really have who don't get it in the same way. So you all are coming with different diagnoses, different experiences of living with the illness, but you all have this thread in common. This you each get it when you talk to each other. So I think when we're thinking about, perhaps more specifically loneliness and leukemia, it is about that, those experiences which are very unique to you, and sometimes how those experiences kind of cause a disconnection with others, or you have to work much harder to try and connect with others, and others might have to work hard to connect with you. My friend lives with CLL, and I always struggle. Shall I ask her how she is? How am I going to broach that? How do I connect with her? I've known her since we were both 5. That's a long time ago now, but it's really hard to find the ways to communicate. So I think communication is a big aspect of this, living with leukemia. And I just read kind of like the notes from the sort of introduction to the webinar, because I think it explains it. Some of the aspects. Living with leukemia can create feelings of loneliness in many ways, from the potentially isolating experience of a cancer diagnosis and the fallout that brings, the impact on life and all aspects of life, through more perhaps specifically the feelings of separation when adjusting to managing and communicating the day-to-day challenges, whether that be kind of like the physical impact or impact of treatment, coping with treatment-related isolation at home or as an inpatient. And many of you may, in a sense, with the pandemic, people said, okay, now other people do get it, in terms of that feeling of vulnerability and needing to protect from infection and exposure to others. And but the reality is that as many people have been able to move on from those feelings of vulnerability, many of you are continuing to have to maintain that looking after yourselves and protecting yourself, and even it being both physically isolating, but that kind of psychologically and emotionally isolating, because really people don't understand, why aren't you back out socializing or whatever. So there are lots of different aspects, but this more than I do, so I'm not really going to, I won't say any more for now. Ask me as we go on, but I'm really looking forward to and interested to hear about your own experiences. And in itself, this time is addressing the topic in a way more than any other, because you're all able to connect with each other around your own experiences.
Thanks, Anne. I think we did have a debate about the title of this webinar and whether loneliness would be self-explanatory. And I think you're right. We always intended it to be the feeling of loneliness and not necessarily the social isolation. I think it's a really important place to start. Maybe that's where I bring in our fellow panelists. I think the first question has to be what loneliness means to each of you in the context of leukemia. How has it affected you over the again, everybody hates the word journey, but I'm going to have to use it, over the period of time then since you were diagnosed with leukemia. Perhaps Jamie, maybe you could start on this one for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a massive introvert and I'm really shy, and I don't necessarily feel comfortable, in large groups, or don't have that kind of desire for social interaction. But for me, loneliness was very much something that I felt, and it wasn't so much as the missing other individuals. it was almost as much as just missing that kind of connection with the outside world. And that's what I've always kind of lacked, you know, even like before leukemia, when I had mental health issues, I would miss that connection. And, you know, the first thing that I'd always do when I realized this was, you know, to put on, you know, like talk radio, like Radio 5 or something like that, where there's just people talking, or put on 24-hour news, which, however, you know, heartbreaking watching the news all day can be, you feel connected to the moment, and you feel connected to the area. But I certainly, you know, throughout the whole of being ill, the social side of it really did affect me as well, because you just can't see anyone. You've gone from interacting with other people and just being around them all the time to just being by yourself in a room, and your best friend is a nurse, and that was very, very challenging to try and cope with. So it's something that I'd never really considered myself as being lonely before. But yeah, absolutely.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Jamie. Lisa, how does your experience compare?
So it's interesting, isn't it, listening to Anne talk about what loneliness is. And I would have thought, you know, similar to Jamie, I'm actually quite an introvert. I love my, you know, time with myself, quite comfortable with that. And the last thing I thought would happen to me during this was that feeling of physical loneliness, not being able to be with people. But I was also quite overwhelmed, and still am, with how lonely I felt at certain stages of my journey. Excuse me for saying that as well. And for me, there was like 3 main areas that were probably the worst parts of loneliness for me. It was my initial diagnosis, so very early on after the diagnosis, feeling very lonely, and that was about trying to be brave for other people. So not really saying how I felt. So I felt lonely because it was only me who knew that. So I'm saying to everyone, it'll be okay, it's fine. I'd sort of made up this stump speech to phone, you know, the children, all the relatives, but inside I was feeling really terrible about it. And then, so that was my first experience of loneliness. And then my second one came during my treatment. So I was an inpatient for my treatment, and I was in isolation. So I was having both. I was having this, you know, I was saying all these positive things to everybody else, but actually I was separated from everybody else. And my true thoughts, feeling pretty miserable, I was only sharing with myself. So that was kind of the middle section. And then what I've found now is the position I'm in now is I've got this looking good period. So I see people, oh my word, Lisa, you're looking great. Aren't you doing well? And people going, oh, I forgot you'd even been ill. And I know a girl who had such a thing, and it suddenly becomes somebody else's story. So you're still there going, well, what about me? I don't feel as though I look really good. And so I'm still at that stage where still feeling at times really quite lonely in my journey.
Thanks, Lisa. I like that you called it the looking good period. I think that was something that everyone was nodding on. It seems that it's quite a relatable thing.
Yeah.
I think we will come back to the different stages, and while there are different types of leukemia, I think it sounds to me that transition can sometimes be the loneliest part. So I think we'll come back to that idea in a moment. Robin, what does loneliness mean in the context of what you've experienced so far?
So in the early days of my diagnosis, so I was diagnosed 10.5 years ago. I didn't tell people the truth of my situation, specifically because, well, as we sit here at the moment, my mother is 93, and I didn't want her to be worried about my situation. That was quite hard. And in fact, I ended up changing my position and having what I sort of termed my inner group of friends of about a dozen or so that I told everything. They could ask any question they wanted on the condition they were prepared to hear the answer. It was my opening position. And I found that sort of gave me the chance to share a worry, trouble shared is halved. Because this is all pre-pandemic. The pandemic has made me a little bit more, excuse me, I have a cough at the moment. The pandemic made me a bit more cautious, but through the periods when we could go out, my wife and I would walk the dog. We live in the Peak District, so we'd go into the hills. But we would go at sunrise, whatever the time was, and then make sure we were back before anybody else went out. So that was as early as 5:15 sometimes. I couldn't cope with any earlier. Since then, I've become more relaxed. I've increased the number of people I've told. In fact, in reality, if somebody makes a comment, I have no worry about sharing any details with them anymore. And I find that for me personally, that works really well, because I then know, I don't have to think, oh, who have I told what? Because it was getting a bit complicated, I found, as I didn't keep a notebook of who I'd told what. Anyway, so now I'm fairly open about it, and I find that works for me in terms of not feeling lonely or anything. I'm involved with 2 or 3 groups that have got about a dozen people involved. Quite often there's less than that of it come, and it works well, and half the meetings are on Zoom anyway. So keeping interaction with other people has really worked well for me. Probably about the best I could say.
Thanks, Robin. I think it's interesting how your approach changed over time. I think that's really interesting to hear, and shows how you don't have to sort of set your mind on something at the very beginning and not sort of change over time. It's all about how you're feeling in the particular moment. Melanie.
I tried to do what Robin did and just tell a select number of people what was going on. That didn't work. I'm too impulsive for that. I ended up telling pretty much everyone, because being diagnosed and starting treatment affected my life so much. And my leukemia is chronic, so it means I've been living with it for the past 5 years. And that was a hard thing to explain to others, because most people think, oh, you have leukemia, you get a bone marrow transplant, you're fine, or you die. It's one or the other. People don't really understand how it can be 5 years later and you're still getting treatment for it. Not everyone, obviously. People who are close to me, they understand. So my very close friends and my family, they know what it's like. But older acquaintances and so on, they're like, oh, have you finished treatment yet? How come you've been doing treatment for so long and you aren't better yet? So I find that quite isolating. But honestly, I haven't struggled too much with feelings of loneliness, but I've also actively pursued forming a little community. So I'm very active on Instagram. I have a personal one and one for my crafts, and I ended up meeting a whole bunch of other people who also crochet like me, but who have chronic illnesses also, and not necessarily leukemia or other cancers. Some people do have other cancers or have had them, but some people have CFS or fibromyalgia, lupus, and other chronic diseases, and their lives are very similar to mine. And so basically, I've always got someone to talk to if I want to, even if I'm stuck at home. a lot of the time. But back to the loneliness bit, one of the things that I found really hard with the people who don't understand the chronic aspect of it was someone who every day would write me and be like, oh, what's up? What's new going on? And I'm like, my life is literally the same 99% of the days. I go out maybe once or twice a month because I'm so exhausted all the time. And that was pre-pandemic. During the pandemic, it was no going out at all. So I find that kind of question makes me feel very apart from other people. But other than that, I think I've coped quite well in forming online friendships and not sticking only to people with leukemia. I have some CML friends that I met in a leukemia care support group, and we've stayed in touch. And I have lots of my crochet friends and other internet friends who are also chronically ill.
Thanks, Melanie. I think we've got plenty of themes coming up here. I'm just sort of wondering where we go next, really. Anne, I think I want to ask you at this point, Melanie sort of spoke a bit there about others' expectations of you when you're ill, you know, how are you not better yet, those sorts of things. Do you, when you're talking to patients, often find that the expectations of others are sort of contributing to their sort of emotional well-being at certain points in time?
Sorry, a little delay in unmuting there. Sometimes I think people describe, I wish people would sometimes delay before they unmute and come out with what really is the most, can be inappropriate expectations and remarks. And I think it's very common that we human beings have a great capacity to either be sort of somewhere on a spectrum of really being able to kind of try to imagine what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes, or at least be curious and interested about what's going on for someone, to the other end of that continuum where, yeah, as you were saying, Lisa, it can be a story about somebody else or about them, because they just don't seem to be able to kind of appreciate or have the, I don't know, yeah, perhaps awareness to be really present to the person in front of them. So I think it can often be the way that other people's expectations, particularly, well, I was going to say for people who might have had treatment for an acute episode of illness, and then being in that kind of recovery time and that transition, a little bit as you were saying, Lisa, in your looking good phase, and the desire of everybody around you, to want you to be well, and for everybody to be able to put this behind you and make it history. Whereas the reality for you is that no, this is the reality of today, and living through it, and almost trying to process what you've been through when treatment comes to an end, or treatment is ongoing, or you may be in a period of active surveillance. So there are all sorts of kind of different scenarios, if you like, that people just struggle to try and appreciate and get their head around, and that can leave you feeling. I think my observation would be that you soon get to know, as you said, Robin, you identified your core group. Melanie, it kind of grew and grew, but you've very actively discovered people who can appreciate the experience of living with chronic illness. So, we get to know the people that when they say, how are you, they don't really want to know the answer. And those people who are, how are you? No, really, how are you? And I think we, kind of respond accordingly.
Do you have any particular advice for sort of dealing with the expectations of others?
I think it's about trying to gauge that, how much do they really want to understand, and can you come up with a few almost like stock phrases for those people who are probably or possibly not going to get into the kind of like the nitty-gritty of understanding your particular situation and your particular treatment, and what the expectations might be for you and your and the treating team. And sometimes people are overly interested, and I might sometimes suggest to people that, again, they have a stock response. Oh, I'm having a cancer-free day today, or a leukemia-free day today. Tell me what have you been up to not go there. But it's kind of, it takes a lot of energy, doesn't it? All of this processing and working out how am I going to respond, and that can feel a bit unfair that the onus is then on yourself.
Can I just comment on that,
Anne?
Because I love the way you say, preparing your stock answers, and it is quite a lot of effort. But I'm a big believer in, we have to take control of our own illness. And in business, I learned a trick whereby I'd think of those stock answers, and the phrase, have something up your sleeve. And I'd visualize these things up my sleeve. So when I was in a situation, I had them ready to pull out from up my sleeve. And they would range from the people, like you say, and Robin said, when they ask, it can all come out. So you don't bring just a little question answer out. You've got a whole loo roll of paper coming out with things you're going to share with them. Or it can be a very quick one, just as you've described, where they say, oh, how are you doing? And you think they don't really want to know. So I actually do that positivity, which actually has done me harm in some ways, but go, oh, I'm doing very well, thank you. What about you? I heard you've been away on holiday, and you just detract. But it helped me to visualize these actual statements up my sleeve that I can pull out when I need them.
I chip in a little somewhat flippant comment. My pet hate is someone saying, how are you? Some of you might know I'm a bit pedantic about facts. Others, you've only met me for the first time. Anyway, so my response to that, apart from a few people, is all things considered pretty well. Tells them nothing, but they think I've told them quite a lot.
Oh, don't, when you get that email that says, hi, Jamie, I hope this email finds you well.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness me. It just drives me mad because, do I reply to it? Do I just leave it? And it can be so difficult. It really can, because you're dealing with that kind of, someone separated from distance, because you've communicated with your friends, and, your loved ones and your family, they've got an understanding of what's going on. But do you then go, well, actually, I'm not. I think one of my struggles when I started back at work after treatment was that very thing, that there were expectations. Oh, why are you only working 2 days a week? Oh, you get every Friday off. Yeah, not for good reasons. So, I wrote something for my work intranet, to go on the website, because we're all working remotely. It's a pandemic, all that kind of stuff. I still work remotely now, but I just put my health journey, my illness story on the staff intranet, so everyone could read it, and if they wanted to find out more, they could, because I've been very open with this whole thing. Again, I think it's being that kind of introvert, insular kind of person, wanting to keep it shy, at the same time, you don't want to have to retell your story 1,000 times. So, you know, we did a Facebook page where we just put all of our updates on there. And at the bottom, for people that wanted to get more information, there's like, you know, here comes the science bit, and there'd be a link off to, you know, the treatment plan, or, you know, a better description of the illness than I could try and muster. But, you know, it's just in those kind of circumstances when you want people to know, but you don't actually want to have that conversation, because that's a lot of work. It's you know, and that's why we did this kind of mass broadcast of everything that was going on in our life, so we didn't have to have those awkward, painful, tiring conversations. Because, you know, like you said, when you're talking to someone about it, chances are they haven't experienced any form of leukemia. Chances are, you know, they may have experienced cancer, and it may have been, you know, a full scare, or it may have been someone who died. And therefore, because you're just a human being and you try to relate to what someone else is saying, that's when you go back with that, oh, my aunt had cancer, she died, you know, or, oh, my sister thought she had cancer, but it was just a mole. And because you're just trying to empathize, you're trying to be a decent human being, and it just comes out so horribly, horribly, painfully wrong. And can just be like, you know, this isn't all about me, you know, but, you know, at the same time, you know, it's really, really challenging. So, you know, for me to try and overcome that, you know, I just tried to share as much as I humanly could without actually talking to anyone, because, you know, that was just so much effort, so much, and I was so confused.
Jamie, I love the way you said that, you know, people are, because they're concerned, the words maybe not in the right order. And I think we've got to give people a bit of slack, that they are trying, you know, it's with positive intent initially, then it drifts off to something else. But yeah, I think that's an important point to make.
I think
It can be a
also,
barrier, can't it? It can be a barrier to having those conversations, and can enforce that kind of loneliness, because you just think, no one gets me, no one understands me, I'm alone in this little world. And, you know, like Melanie was saying about, you know, having a chronic condition as well. And, you know, it can just really hard when people don't quite get you. So it makes you more scared to socialize and interact, and makes you more isolated and more lonely. So yeah, it can be really difficult. Sorry, Robin.
no, that's okay. All I was going to say was, I think we also have a bit more of a challenge than most people that come across cancer come across solid tumors, and I doubt they get the concept that what we have is totally pervasive across all of our bodies. You know, it's easy to assimilate the information for there's a problem, not there's a problem. So they can put it in the box and handle it. But it takes a while to get used to, oh, it's everything, everywhere.
That's certainly something I hear a lot from people I talk to, is the word leukemia. And obviously it's a challenge for us as a charity in terms of raising awareness of some of the support we do, with not being in the cancer box. I think that's a really important point, Robin. I think what's been really nice listening to you guys talk is we've got such different people in the room, some introverted people, some people who feel a little bit more extroverted, but we've all given some tips depending on who may be listening, you know, different ways you can deal with that. Jamie, obviously you said writing it, so you didn't have to have the face-to-face conversations, but Lisa, you were talking about having some things up your sleeve to stop the conversations. I think there's multiple tips there, so thank you everyone. I think that's really been quite helpful. We've had some questions, so I think we'll address those next. So someone has picked up on this idea of transition, and I think it's probably quite related to some of the stuff we've already talked about, chronic illness, but there is, I think, the perception with cancer that it's very unwell or perfect health and nothing in between. And I think this was what the person's trying to say. I wondered, who should I start with? Robin, has that been sorry to put you on the spot, okay. Someone, has that been something you found quite difficult to explain, like sort of the varying, how day-to-day varying feelings of unwell rather than perfect health or really unwell?
I think most of the time is neither perfect health nor being unwell. It's floating around the middle somewhere. And that's really not that much different to life, but maybe 10% worse or 15% worse or something. So it's just trying to keep a handle on that. In the early days, I did have an issue with my boss who, his friend's wife had breast cancer and she was getting radiography. And when he found out what the hospital were going to do with me, which wasn't radiography, he was all for getting in the car and going and telling them what they were doing wrong. So once I'd calmed him down, I realized I needed to just handle it a little bit more carefully. So I don't really see really ill days. Just the odd day when I keep coughing, which I apologize. But I mean, I probably have no more ill days than I did before, if you exclude the periods when I was being treated. And you can't really count them. Once you're through that and look at, you know, before and after, I'd say I'm very similar.
I think it's come back into the idea of cancer and what is cancer, and people not understanding that, you know, it doesn't necessarily have an end date where you feel perfectly well, no more different to anything else, like you say, Robin. Anyone else, any thoughts at all?
It's a lot about your personality, not your personality, that's the wrong word, your personal appearance, and like Lisa said about that kind of feel good phase. And obviously, you know, I'm always in that kind of looking good phase, but you know, there was you know, when I lost my hair, that was when I was like, oh, hold on, you know, I'm going to chemo. You know, I look like a cancer patient now. I kind of felt like there was some kind of solidarity between me and the other people in the hospital, because before then I was just like this scruffy gat who was, you know, just rocking up and demanding products to be stuck in his arm. But you know, now, you know, I don't, to all intents and purposes, look ill or look disabled, and I still feel that kind of like guilt about, you know, blue badge parking and stuff like that, but the fact is I suffer really badly from fatigue as a result of it. So that's really hard to kind of transition from being, yeah, I'm not having chemo anymore, but, and it's that but, it's those after effects that I think, you know, I've just found that being honest about them and letting people know, you know, setting expectations in advance with people that I'm going to have, you know, whether that's, you know, through work or through personal stuff that, you know, I'm going to have interactions with, just trying to say, look, you know, sure, I can come out for the day, but I might need to sit down quite a lot. Or, you know, telling my boss that, you know, sure, I can take on this project, but I'm going to need to have a nap at some point this afternoon because I'm exhausted. And by doing that, I've managed to set those expectations. But I think otherwise people just, they don't understand unless you explain it to them. And it can be, you know, it can be really hard to put yourself out there and stuff. But, you know, it's got admitting a weakness, you know, because if you sort of go in with that I'm a cancer warrior kind of framework, that therefore the moment you finish chemo and you're like better and, you know, take on the world, you know, you might not be in that position, and certainly the after effects of chemo can really knock you out for, you know, in my case 3 years. I'm still not back. I don't know if I ever will be. You know, my hair's grown back, but that's about it. You know, the rest of me is still struggling. I just, you know, obviously I look amazing, but you know, that's the only kind of thing that I have going for me in terms of, like, you know, my post chemo experience. So yeah, you know, it is really hard, and it's just setting those expectations, because otherwise people make assumptions, and we know what assumptions make.
When you said about feeling guilty, Jamie, I was very lucky because on the chemo that I received, only 2% of patients have hair loss. So although my hair started to shed, but that was because of the drug I took then for 6 weeks after, my hair was shedding, but I didn't look like a cancer patient. And when I was going then each week to see the consultant for the first couple of months and other people had no hair, I then felt guilty, and I felt that I was also excluded from the real patients club as well, which is so weird. And I've tried to teach myself and have these mechanisms that no, it's okay. And it was okay even when I was really poorly in isolation as an inpatient to try and put my makeup on and try and do my hair and get up every day and get dressed. It's okay to do that. It's okay to look as good as you can. And once I got my head around that, I started to feel less lonely. You know, I just accepted the facts. But yeah, guilt can absolutely come into it, definitely.
Oh, Lisa, I'm looking at you and at my own video, and I was like, oh, I wish I'd put some makeup on.
You wouldn't have wanted to see me without.
You both look very nice. Thank you for. I know what you mean about looking at yourself. It's quite off-putting on a Zoom, isn't it? Thank you, everyone.
But I wanted to just comment something on what Jamie said, but I'm having a brain fog moment. Oh, sorry. I guess. Oh, it's almost there. Just give me another second.
Fine, take your time.
Sorry, I'll mute myself while I think.
Anne, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I'll let me jump in just to give you that space, Melanie, to think. I suppose I was thinking about, you know, we were talking about the expectations of others, and I was struck by what you've been saying about, you know, the expectations that we might have of ourselves, in every sense. But there's something about, you know, being a good patient, being a good cancer patient, being a good leukemia patient. It's kind of, you know, who sets these expectations, and you know, what does society expect, and you know, hair loss. You know, it's kind of like the image of somebody being treated for cancer. And then, you know, there's an expectation that then you get the all clear, which, you know, I've never come across an oncologist ever who will say, yeah, now you've got the all clear. It's kind of, we try to simplify to make this kind of, you know, scary, anxiety provoking, uncertain and unknown experience, kind of put it into a manageable box, if you like. But of course it's much more complicated than that, and you know, and there's much more sort of, you know, trying to think about, you know, this is about living with a chronic illness, in much the same way that, you know, living with diabetes or living with cardiac failure. I don't really like that as a term. You know, so it's whereas you know, we've still got such a long way to go in terms of trying to re-educate ourselves as a society, I think, in how we think about these illnesses. And sometimes, yeah, it's for every person who can, you know, come through treatment for cancer and, you know, climb a mountain or run a marathon, there are probably, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40 people trying to live with cancer-related fatigue, which is just so hard. And people just don't get, oh, you know, go and have a lie down, you'll be fine to come out tonight. Doesn't work like that. And if I do go out, I know tomorrow is going to be a complete wipeout. It's you know, I think fatigue is really one of the most challenging, and even, you know, even for healthcare professionals, I don't think we always kind of give it enough space and prepare people for just what a unique experience it can be. So I don't know if that's helped, Melanie. Has it come back? Let's catch it now.
I actually took notes so I wouldn't forget. That's my life now. So I was talking to a friend who's had breast cancer and lung cancer, but hers is a neuroendocrine kind. And we were talking about how much of our lives is chasing up tests and doctors. And not only, I sometimes when people ask me, what do I do for a living, which is my personal pet peeve, I hate that question because what do I say? My life's on hold and it's been on hold for 5 years. I can't work because of the side effects I get from treatment. So I now reply that I'm a professional patient. Sometimes I just say I'm a translator, which is what I used to do before if I don't want to deal. So it's like that card up your sleeve, like Lisa mentioned. But my life is literally being a professional patient. I have doctor's appointments different across all different specialties because the treatment affects so many different things. And I'm sure even people who, like Lisa and Jamie, who had acute cancer and treatment, like you said, the fatigue doesn't go away. You might have osteoporosis early because of the treatment, or problem with your teeth or nerves. And most people just don't understand that. And it's quite hard to try to explain that having cancer isn't a done deal once you've recovered. And also the constant fear of reoccurrence if you've had one that's been treated in remission. That's also a constant weight on your mind. Any new symptom is like, oh no, is the cancer back or something like that. So I think I try to educate people when they ask me this kind of thing, but I don't always have the energy for it. But yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie. I think there's still a lot of work to be done around the perception of cancer, as Anne said, and I think you just given a very good example there. And also, I'm glad you've both brought up work, because I think obviously if you are of working age, then work is a social thing as well as a money thing. So I think it's really interesting that you've both brought that up. I think it's important to work out how you want to communicate, whether you're working, whether you're not working, and then how you cope with not working in terms of a new social group. We have managed to chat already for 40 minutes, and I'm very keen that we come back to your point, Melanie, about community and a community of people with shared experiences around illness, because I think that's a really interesting point. And actually there are some very active leukemia communities out there. So I guess my question to you all is, how useful have you found those networks? And I don't know who wants, I don't know if you want to say any more as a start, Melanie, and then perhaps others can join in.
Okay. When I first got diagnosed, I came across a couple of CML networks, CML specific. One of them was American, and the other one was the Leukemia Care CML patient group on Facebook. And it was just so good. I didn't even post at first, I just lurked. And I had to read at what people said. I used the search function a lot. I'm like, is this normal? Is that normal? Do people get this? Do people get that? Because you can get some very odd side effects from medication. And people do talk about it in the group, even like quite personal stuff, but it's just like, who else do you ask? So like, who else could I ask, for example, oh, did this medication alter your period or something like that? And so sometimes it's very good to be able to talk to other patients. And that's not only what goes on. People talk about personal things. I've heard people say, how soon do you tell someone you're dating about your diagnosis? Do you just come out and say, oh, by the way, I have cancer? Or how do you lead into that? And people had a nice discussion about that, and you can get lots of different opinions and people's stories. So for example, oh, I did this, and someone else will say, oh, I did the other. and based on that, you can make your decision. So that's about the CML specific communities. And I also, like I said, I follow quite a few people on Instagram who have chronic diseases, and I've become disabled from CML in the more traditional sense that now I have to use a wheelchair to get out. I mean, we think it's the CML, I still don't know, so that's under investigation. And it was good to learn that it's okay to be able to walk and still use a wheelchair when you need it, because there's also quite a bit of taboo around that. And so it was just good to see other people who are doing that. And it helped me feel empowered to make the decision that, like, yes, a wheelchair is the best mobility aid for me at this moment. And so I just say, if something is bothering you, have a look online, see if someone else is going through it. You never know, you might find other people who have tips and ideas, and you might find a little group of people you can talk to and help combat this loneliness that comes from cancer.
I think what I like about the CML group is the way people just post stuff that's not really related to the CML but celebrating something. I think that's always nice to see the little mix in there. Or someone's asked if we could share the links to the Facebook group. Yes, I'm sure we can sort that out before we finish the webinar. Absolutely. Anybody, any of the other panelists like to comment? Jamie?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, so yeah, in my day job, I'm a online community manager. So you know, for me, it was the obvious kind of thing. Unfortunately, I couldn't really see very well or type very well when I was really ill. But I've managed to do quite a lot of lurking of like their Health Unlocked community, and it's just so vital, because especially with these kind of very precise diagnoses that we have, where they're all very, very specialist, and our drugs are very, very specialist. You know, my particular type of leukemia is like, I think it's like 100 people get it a year or something daft like that in the UK. I was lucky enough to meet one person in the hospital with me, in outpatients, you know, when we're having our chemo. She was like a cycle of treatment ahead of me. So I got to speak to her a couple of times, you know, to just sort of compare notes. But apart from that, there was no one. So being able to join like the Leukemia Care APL group, you know, the sort of the monthly meetups on Zoom have just been amazing to actually connect and share an experience, because you've got no one else to compare it to. You've got no one else sort of nodding along with you when you're telling them the story, because they don't relate. And that's been the absolute blessing of all this, has been, you know, finding that sense of community through Leukemia Care for me, because otherwise I was just sort of, you know, talking to my wife who's literally been there all the way through, nothing new to be said there, or, you know, just talking to my friends who didn't necessarily understand, because, you know, how can they, you know, literally the only thing they use arsenic trioxide for is to treat APL. So why would anyone else in the world have an experience of the after effects of having arsenic? By the way, it's not fun. So, you know, it was really, really hard to get that. And I did feel lonely until I started making those connections. And, you know, like Melanie was saying about her crochet online experience, I've had the same in sort of with like disabled arts and with poetry in particular. And those communities have just been so welcoming, and they understand that you're not going to be able to produce some work in 24 hours because you're exhausted all the time. And it's just really nice, you know, connecting with other people with like long-term fatigue issues or tiredness issues or disability issues, and being able to be that kind of activist voice almost. And they get your frustrations at the lack of disabled parking or the lack of accessibility for online events, and you feel a companionship. And I think that's kind of what I was missing, because, you know, now we're in this sort of post-pandemic era, although many of us haven't left it yet, and it's our lives are still the same. You know, it's just the world's changing back to in-person events and all that kind of thing, and we just feel left behind. And I think by being able to connect with other people online is ideal, because they're there, we're there, and it doesn't really matter if they're in the States, they're in Australia. Just the fact that you can communicate and have a shared experience, because I think that's that what causes the loneliness, the lack of someone to share that experience with?
Charlotte, I really love the specific leukemia care support. So I've seen Robin a couple of times on the virtual meetings. I enjoy them. I also enjoy the face-to-face that have just been reintroduced back at the Maggie's Centre at the Christie. I found those so helpful, absolutely so helpful. And similar to Jamie, hairy cell leukemia is a rare form of leukemia. So finding people to talk to, and there's nobody in the actual group. I've managed to find a lady that lives in the Wirral and she did dial into the specific hairy cell seminar with Claire Dearden, and that was amazing. So to have the experts in the field, you know, there, and you can ask them questions about your very specific illness, has been a massive support for me and brought me out of not feeling as lonely. And even the mixed ones that I'm on with Robin, it's interesting hearing about other types of leukemia. Almost it's a wider group of people going through similar things. So those support groups have been an absolute lifeline for me. And also just the general resources. So going in and using the website is really helpful. And I did join in the Step Out in September, was it called, for leukemia care. And again, that was almost a little community. You know, there was a group on Facebook. So it sort of has a ripple effect, like Melanie was saying. You get into one thing and then you find yourself in another. But yeah, mixed with some of my own stuff and then pulling on the resources from leukemia care. Yeah, good things to do.
Thanks, Lisa. I think you've covered all my slides at the end, so hopefully the fact we're running out of time. Thank you for that. That's been really helpful, and I'm so glad you found it all really useful. Robin, is there any one thing you wanted to say on this topic before we finish?
The primary things I use are Health Unlocked for CLL and the virtual support group where I have met Lisa a couple of times. Was just a nice informal chat, you know, so that's nothing really much else to add, to be honest.
I was currently finding the Facebook links. I will try and find the Health Unlocked ones before we finish. I think that is also a really good community. And I wanted to ask you before we go about the usefulness of professional help in relation to this topic. I don't know if you have any specific thoughts on when people should seek professional help from people like yourselves.
Sure. Well, hopefully it is useful when you do seek it, if necessary. I mean, I think, you know, we've been talking about connecting and being able to express what's going on and feel that that is valid and normal, and we've also talked about sometimes it's kind of hard to find people who can listen in a sense that we feel heard, and living with these illnesses is hard going and very challenging at times, and sometimes people will find themselves really struggling, and that would be the time then hopefully there might be some professional support, for example counselling, where, you know, I would offer someone space to try and begin to make sense and put some words to the experience in a way that is a almost like a supportive and non-judgmental space without expectations, because everybody, you know, it's important to connect and others get it. But at the same time, everybody's going to have this very individual experience. And sometimes it's really hard to make some sense of that and kind of just get, I suppose, reconnected to that sense of self and what it's like to be me now with this diagnosis. So there may be support available through your treatment centre, through counsellor support centres, for example, the Maggie centres, or perhaps more local centre. There's counselling available through Leukaemia Care, through the, is it Anne Ashley Fund? Yeah, which is a fantastic kind of facility to be able to have. And I think that, obviously that might not be for everybody, but I think for people who enter into counselling, find it helpful, get some clarity, what works for them or what might be helpful for them.
Thank you, Anne, for that. My time management skills have been found lacking once again, so I'll just end by saying thank you to our panellists, and I will whiz through my slides as quickly as possible, although both Anne and Lisa have done a great job of talking about how we can help, so that hopefully should save us a little bit of time. So we wanted to point out our booklets as a particularly useful piece of information in the context of our discussion today, in terms of sharing them with others, if you find that a good way of explaining what you're going through. So you might find that helpful. And then just to flag a few of the support services we offer that have already come up in part. If you're looking to talk to a very specific person with the same diagnosis as you, we have our buddy scheme where we match people up short-term or long-term. So please do reach out if that's something of interest. Robin and Lisa have already talked about our support meetings. We are running them both in person and online at the moment, so everybody can access those in various ways, and you can find them on the website and search by blood cancer type or by location, whatever suits you. Anne's very kindly mentioned the counselling fund. If you're unable to get counselling through other means, or there's a long waiting list, would recommend you reach out to us, because we can fund some counselling for you. And here's how you get in touch with us if you need more information. Just a quick word on some fundraising things we have going on at the moment. We have recently started a cost of living fund to support people who are experiencing difficulties with costs at the moment. We know that leukemia, even outside of the current economic situation, did impact on people's finances, so we felt this was a really important fund. But if you are able to support that fund by the means of a donation, that would really help us help as many people as possible at the moment. So I just wanted to put a quick word in for that. And also we have a nice Christmassy one, if you'd prefer to sort of light up the sky with a star in memory of someone, or to thank someone who's helped you through your journey. We also have a little way of doing that too, which is quite nice. Leave this up while I quickly say thank you again to Anne, to Jamie, to Lisa, to Robin and Melanie. Thank you all for sharing your experiences. I know it can be quite difficult to talk about them in such a public forum, so we really appreciate you sharing your thoughts, and I hope everyone's found it helpful. And I'll say goodbye. Have a lovely evening, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, bye.